I'd also like to take this opportunity at the beginning of our webinar to acknowledge that this series is part of our recently launched For Purpose Executive Leadership Program. Much like many of you, we've had to change how we're operating a little bit during the pandemic, and we've had to delay our face-to-face modules this year. But it's actually given us the opportunity to expand the program and include 3 webinars and include so many more of you who are interested in the issues facing the social purpose sector. I'm so grateful for the support that we've received from the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation, the Helen Macpherson Smith Trust, Christina Campbell Priddy and the Evans 5 Fund, all of which have made not just this webinar series possible, but our pilot 3-year program focused on developing the capability of for-purpose leaders. So just a few little housekeeping points explaining how our webinar will run today, including how you can get involved. I will shortly introduce you to 2 of my favourite colleagues, Geoff and Greg, and we'll spend about 40 minutes talking through some of the issues around adapting business models right now. And we'll then have time for some Q&A. If you've got a question, you can submit it at any time using the Q&A function. And if you see a question submitted that you'd also like to be answered, you can upvote that question by pressing the thumbs up button. At the conclusion of our webinar, we'll redirect you to a short survey, and I thank you in advance for taking the time to provide us with some really valuable feedback as we refine this new form of knowledge engagement. So as I previously mentioned, my name's Jody Evans. I'm an Associate Professor of Marketing at Melbourne Business School, and I'm really delighted to be joined today by my colleagues Geoff Martin, who's a Professor of Strategy here at MBS, and Greg Harbidge, who's one of our Senior Executive Educators and Leadership Coaches. Thanks so much to both of you for joining me in today's discussion. When we were reflecting over the last few days on this webinar series, Geoff and Greg and I really recognised how close we are to the issues facing many of you right now. MBS is also a social purpose organisation. We don't receive financial support from the university. We don't really receive very much government funding, and we're dependent on our business model of fee for service, supplemented with philanthropic support. And so like many of you, our way of operating had to change, literally overnight. One day the school was buzzing with students and executive education participants, and the next, my faculty colleagues and our executive educators were upskilling to be able to serve our community online. We were fortunate in the fact that we'd already started to build this capability, but we really hadn't moved aggressively in the online education space. So we've been certainly adapting our business model and also using this time as an opportunity to review and reflect on our programs and use it as a source of innovation. So we understand some of the challenges facing the social purpose sector, but we'd also love to hear a bit more of your opinion. I recognise that we've got a pretty diverse audience joining us today, from those leading and working in the sector to interested alumni, and also those looking to do more to be able to support social purpose organisations through these turbulent times. So we've got just a little brief poll to kick things off this morning, and an opportunity for you to share with us what you believe to be the top 3 challenges facing social purpose organisations right now. So it's a bit of a multiple choice. You can select up to 3 challenges, and I'll give you a little minute now just to have a look at those challenges we've listed and for you to give us your opinion. You can't see the results yet because we haven't shared them with you, but it's a moving feast here as different issues take priority. So we're just going to end the poll in about 5 more seconds. There we go. So in sharing these results, I hope what you can see is the complexity of issues facing the sector right now. That coming out at number one is obviously decreased revenue. This is a huge issue we're hearing from certainly all of the organisations that we work with at the moment, that funding streams have really changed. That for many of you, there's also the pressure of an increased demand for services. The other big topic, of course, is building digital and technological capability, as we've all have to shift the way we're engaging with our stakeholders. So it's quite handy that that's the other big issue, because that's the focus actually of our next webinar in the series, is building digital capability. And then the other top issue that I can see there is managing change. And so these are the sorts of issues that we'll be able to share with you and talk through this morning. And particularly looking at this issue of diversifying revenue streams and how we react to the fact that some of our revenue streams have dried up a little bit. That this is what Geoff's going to really help you on this morning, is thinking through these issues and giving you some structure to evaluate your options and start to strategize around changing your business model. And then Greg's really going to deal with some of these more human side of things, of how we're managing this change and leading through change. And then I'll talk a little bit about how we can leverage some of what we're going through actually as a platform of engaging our stakeholders. So I'm going to hand over to Geoff now, who's going to start talking you through some of the ways you can approach adapting your business model to address these challenges. Thanks so much, Geoff.
Thank you, Jody, and hi everyone. Welcome back to the webinar series. So as we start to ask these questions about how to adapt, what should we be doing, it's helpful to go back to the really big questions about your strategy. So why do we exist in the first place? Who are we set up to serve? I'm just going to share a few slides to walk you through my thought process. So a really good starting point as we stop and say, what else could we be doing, or what should we be doing right now, is to start with the question of what social problem are we here to solve? Now, it sounds quite a simple process, but it's interesting how many social enterprises and non-for-profits get stuck on this one. So, for instance, you may have believed that you were set up to try and create more economic empowerment for Indigenous artists. So I'm talking about an example that we worked with recently at Melbourne Business School, when we stopped and drilled down on the problem and spoke to the groups that we were working with, the real issue was about connection to culture and bringing young people back to have conversations with elders. So have you really nailed that social problem? And put numbers around it. Now, to you, the social problem might be blatantly obvious, but you need to at some point convince some funders or employees, or maybe a customer, that this is a cause worth getting behind. So don't take it for granted that others understand exactly what the social problem is. Spell it out and have a tight story. So the next part of this, once I've identified that social problem, I want to have a vision for that social problem. And this is why in the social enterprise non-for-profit world, the vision can be so powerful. So you explain the problem, and your vision is that that problem is either solved or substantially reduced. So that's a beginning point in our journey of developing a story and ultimately getting to a tight story around why you are doing what you have chosen to do, or what you plan to do in the next year, 2 years, 5 years. So the next part of it is purpose. So you've got a vision, which is the problem solved. Purpose is where you tell me a bit more about exactly what you're going to do to deliver on that purpose. So if you look at that particular vision, there's a lot of ways we could try and achieve that. So we could work with teachers to improve cultural competence. We could work with families to help them understand the challenges of their children. But given the resources that this organisation had, it made sense to work after school. And they were well connected in the sporting community, so they were going to do role modelling and mentoring in an after school program. So that was their purpose. And the purpose was very clear on exactly who they were working for and what they were doing for them. So when you hold a purpose or a mission statement up to the light, just ask that question. Is it telling me what group I'm here primarily to serve and what I'm doing for them? And then you can come up with a story of, and here's all the things that I do to deliver on that purpose. So once you've got that tight story, you've got that platform to then say, okay, so what does it make sense for me to be doing? So as I adapt or respond to a crisis, and the crisis at the moment, as that poll suggested, is very much driven, or very often driven, by decreased revenue. So I've got less money, I've got less cash. So what am I actually going to do? So I've got a framework that looks like that I sit in front of me, and that's going to be my North Star as I stop and say, righto, here's all the things that I could do. How does that fit with that vision and that purpose? So in this case, at the top, it was that Indigenous youths finish school and flourish. I'm mentoring and counselling them. That's my purpose. That's how I'm going to get to that vision. And then there's the things I do. So enabler 1, 2, 3, or activity 1, 2, and 3, all guided by a set of values. So that's what I'm going to put down in front of me as I start to make choices about how I spend my time and how I spend my precious dollar. So as I stop and think about what are all the possibilities. So here's an ideation process that we could go through to stop and say, what could you be doing or should you be doing now and into the future? So that top left-hand corner is about doing more for the group that you currently work with. So based on their needs and a tight understanding of their needs, what could I do to enhance the quality of the services I currently deliver? Now to the right of that, so the top right-hand corner, so the existing group, add new services. So let's say I'm working with those that have experienced domestic violence. So at the moment I might be rehoming, I might be providing financial and legal support. So do I expand that to a wellness program, for instance? That would be a new service. Existing services to new groups. So I might start using those safe homes, for instance, for people who are financially vulnerable and removed from homes. So maybe it becomes an extension to a homelessness cause. But is that getting too far away from your purpose, whatever that may be? Now in the bottom right corner, new services to new groups. So this is stepping quite a long way away from that core, if you call that top left-hand corner your core. So here you might be, instead of working with those who have experienced domestic violence, here you might be working with those that have experienced mental health issues in your community, but you're leveraging the psychological resources and human resources that you have access to. So what I'm putting in front of you there is a framework to stop and say, how should I be spending my time? And the advice that we typically give is you start in that top left-hand corner, and that's where we try and leverage those capabilities that we have for maximum effect. But then there might be some add-ons, some adjacencies as we call them, where there might be opportunities to add value easily for other groups, or add existing services so that we're doing more for the focal group. So all of this happens through the lens of my values and my purpose. So as I put all those possibilities down, I then stop and say, well, let's go through a process of evaluating all the possibilities. So I'm suggesting the first step is to write a list. Here's all the things that I am doing or I could do. Let's evaluate them. So let's evaluate them. How do we do that? Here's a suggestion. So the evaluation criteria, the first one is fit with purpose and values, which is what I was just referring to. The second one is social impact. So it might be a fit, but that particular service, I just may not be having enough reach, or I may not be directly addressing the social issues related to mental health or domestic violence or cultural connection. The social impact may not be great enough. Capability fit. So have I actually got what it takes? So this is quite related to social impact. Have I got the resources internally to actually do that? So I'm an organisation set up to work with burns victims, and I want to do advocacy to address stigmatism issues. And well-meaning people want to address a broad range of issues, but you know what? I've got access to a lot of resources, which is mostly nursing, and I don't have access to PR resources. So I probably need to park the advocacy objective. That's what I mean by capability fit. Have I actually got what it takes? And very often when we do this, so at Melbourne Business School, we do pro bono work with about 20 social enterprises, non-for-profits a year. One of the main value adds is curating the objective list back to about 3 or 4 from a list that usually starts at between 10 and 20. Financial capacity. So what's it going to cost us to deliver that? Have I got what it takes? Where will I get those financial resources? From what sources? Does not overlap with existing service offerings, either from yourself or others in the communities. to others in your community? So am I actually delivering on an unmet community need? So if I run that through, if I run that evaluation criteria through a couple of different service offerings, and quite often I'm doing this across multiple. So when we did this for the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre, we were looking at maybe 8 to 10 possible new services they could offer. And then we applied that filter, that evaluation criteria, to try and work out, okay, so where is there too much red? As in, which of those are flashing red and which are flashing green? And what I mean by that is you do a traffic light kind of assessment initially to try and work out the ones that will immediately drop off. Big capability issue, not enough social impact. So in the case of the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre, we're looking at the number of those seeking asylum that we can get job ready and economically empower. So which of those services we're looking at would hit that social impact, for instance? So there's a process to go through to come up with a list. So see there I've just listed service 1, service 2. So just an example, one might be government advocacy, service 2 might be after school programs. So all the things that you are doing or could do. And I encourage you to do this with your existing services as well. Don't take it for granted that they immediately pass these tests. And then we come back and ask the question, okay, so which should we drop? What do we stop, start and change? So make this a basis for action. You run it through, or run all your potential services and existing services through that filter process, and then you stop, start and change. You move in different directions, you adapt. So I'll just leave you with this. So ultimately we're trying to work out where's your sweet spot. So social impact, I need to be having that social impact that my purpose tells me I'm here to deliver. There needs to be the community need. So I might have a social impact in mind, but am I really clear that there is a social problem? And this goes back to that bit about social problem. Now, the left hand, on the left-hand side there, the unmet social need. So community need, and no one else is serving that. So I'm offering something that is uniquely valuable. And down the bottom there, capability fit. So I've got what it takes to step into that space and really make a difference. Given no one else is doing it, I will have impact and the community needs it. I'll pass it back to you, Jody.
Thanks, Geoff. I can really see how that framework that you're talking through can help social purpose organisations during this crisis. You can see everyone's grappling with so much change, and that framework, particularly things like our organisational and our financial capability, given that you've got decreased revenue, if you're making tough decisions around staffing cuts, or, I know for many organisations that are more volunteer supported, suddenly you haven't got your volunteers able to be there. You need to be able to reevaluate whether you've got the capability to address some of these needs right now. And I think that framework you give really gives us the opportunity to reflect deeply on where are we still got the same capabilities to leverage, and if that's changed, then how are our service offerings going to change?
Yep.
So that's a really nice jumping off point actually for Greg to talk us through a little bit. These are hard decisions to make. It's tough to go through this evaluation process right now. You're in crisis mode, as well as having to take the time to do this really strategic work again, to take time out of the operational weeds and reflect on what services should we be offering now, what do we need to change, what do we need to cut, are there potential collaborations and partnerships we should be pursuing? And then, of course, there's all of the challenge of engaging your supporters and donors along this journey. So, Greg, how can leaders manage this sort of process and the stress that comes with having to evaluate and adapt your business model?
Yeah, I was getting stressed, Jody, just listening to you, all the things there that you're listing that people are dealing with. But it's very true, all those elements that you mentioned, and there's very human challenges to the current times that we're in, and there's human challenges to implementing and applying the concepts that Geoff was just talking about. So really there's two areas I'd like to focus on, Jody, and to the rest of you out there right now. And the first one is around the idea of experimentation. So what do I mean by that? I mean, it's hectic times right now. We're in the midst of a global pandemic, and I think it's important that people remember that. What does that mean? It means leaders, staff members, boards, donors, communities, often no one knows what the right way forward is. There's a lot of competing needs. There's a lot of different ideas. You just have to look at in the media every day at the competing needs and the different ideas that are being thrown around. And the idea of experimentation that I'll talk to in a moment is that we can experiment and test and learn our way to find our way forward in times of tension, times of crisis like this. The second area that I'll be focusing on is reflection. And reflection is probably one of the most powerful tools leaders, teams, any of us can use in our daily life, particularly when we're under enormous change, which is what we're talking about right now. And not all reflection is made equal, and I want to talk to that. Some reflection is effective, some reflection is not effective. So I want to share some ideas based on research of what is the type of reflection do exceptional leaders do. So they're the two areas I want to focus on. One is experimenting our way forward through these times, through creating new business models, reassessing old business model, assessing decisions around, well, what impact do we want to have? And two, being around reflection. How do we use reflection in this process? So to focus on the first one for a few minutes, this idea of experimenting. Now, some of us are great experimenters. Some of us naturally use test and learn cycles, and some of us don't. Some of the things that get in the way of using test and learn cycles is that we're just so busy, particularly for many of you who are leaders, managers, key decision makers in the organisations that you're part of. You're just so busy typically in the operational side of things. And for good reason. You're needing to deliver impact to your community, to the people that you're serving. Experimenting is a way to help us make decisions. Experimenting is a way to de-risk decisions that we're making. What do I mean by that? If we make decisions and think they're locked in stone and that we're going to do this for the next month or 2 or 3 or the next 12 months, we might actually be setting ourselves up for failure. More and more we're seeing leaders use experimenting as a decision-making process to de-risk. So making choices and testing them. So a number of not-for-profit organisations that I've been involved with are using temporary services right now. What do I mean by that? The moving of things such as mental health services or support services online. Moving things like Pilates classes online, those sorts of things. And they've seen them very much as temporary initially. But then as the experiment's gone on, as they've tested them and they're learning how to make them more effective, they're learning how to really engage people, they're saying, hey, there's something in this and we could improve. That's really what I mean by experimenting. Now, it's a mindset that leaders can encourage in themselves, but importantly in the others in the organisation. What experiments are we doing? What temporary services have we used or are using right now? Or what could we do more of? If we were to take an approach of, let's experiment with things that are temporary with the intention to learn and iterate quickly, what else might we do? And that's one of the other values of experimenting, that we experiment to create new possibilities. If we're locking things in stone, decisions in stone for the next 12 months, it can feel quite limiting, particularly in this environment where the funding demands that you all mentioned has been critical. When the technology demands are changing and just the managing change process is constantly evolving. By experimenting and having that intention to learn and iterate, we create new possibilities. Or we could use the word to new ways to innovate how we're serving those that we're serving through our organisation. So experimenting is really important. And we have a personal orientation to it, as I started to allude to before. Some of us are natural experimenters, some of us aren't natural experimenters. Wherever you sit on that fence, just ask yourself, how could I do more test and learn? What could I do quickly? What could I do in the next 24 hours? What could I do to do things in a new way? And invite others that you're leading or you're working with to be part of that as well. So experimenting our way forward through the challenges of not knowing is what's really important. So that's the concept of experimenting I wanted to touch on. The second concept I wanted to touch on was around reflection. Now, reflection is one of those great things that people would typically say in my line of work that, yes, it's important. So we talk to teams and leaders that, yes, we get the idea of reflection, but gosh, I just don't have time. My diary is so full. I've got so many competing priorities. And often my challenge to them is, well, could you make 5 to 7 minutes, so really small, to reflect each day? And they say, oh yeah, that's manageable. but then quickly it goes back to, but then, you know, I'd have to move this and move that. And so then again, the question is, could you make 5 or 7 minutes a day? I say, okay, yes. So we have a conversation around how people might make space in their day to reflect. And reflection is a powerful habit, particularly in times of change. What we know is when we're under stress, when we're under tension, through these critical times of things being unknown, it's the small little habits that make a difference. We often can't set that goal for 12 months and just work towards it. So what do we do when we can't do that? We can put a focus on habits, and reflection is a really powerful habit. I very intentionally said just 5 to 7 minutes a day. Now, some people reflect in a free-flowing way, and this is links to what I was saying before, not all reflection is made equal. And the free-flowing way serves some people. Perhaps great ideas, great reflections come in the shower, walking the dog, playing with family, just doing some exercise, and that's great. But for other people, a more focused reflection is what's needed. So I want to offer from research what we know that exceptional leaders do when they reflect. So 2 habits of exceptional leaders, according to research, is that they reflect in the morning and they reflect in the evening, even just a few minutes in the morning and a few minutes in the evening. Now the question becomes, what are some of those key questions that we know these exceptional leaders ask themselves and reflect on? And I want to share those now. So to create a morning reflection, or let's call it a morning journaling habit, 3 really great reflections for leaders or managers to be reflecting on are this. You know, what does my organisation most need from me today? Getting really clear of that. Writing a sentence or 2 in reply to that. Second one, how to ensure that I use my time most effectively today? Really powerful question, because as the day starts to move on, as we get to 9 a.m, 11 a.m, 12 a.m, the inbox starts filling up. Other requests, the phone starts ringing, instant messages are going. So really that second question, how do I ensure that my time is best spent today? And then the third question we know exceptional leaders often ask themselves when they're reflecting through morning journaling is this. It's how to ensure I will not be a blocker. And that's a really important question, because in times of change, if you are a blocker, if all decisions need to come through you as a leader, as a manager, then it might limit the possibilities for the services you're providing to the communities that you're serving. So in these times of change, one of the critical things for leaders to be reflecting on is, how do I empower other people to experiment? How do I encourage other people to test and learn? How do I share decision-making with other people? And that's not just within our organisation, but it's with board members, it's with donors, it's with perhaps other organisations in the for-purpose sector that you're working with. You know, so how do I not be a blocker? So sometimes blocking can happen within the organisation, the role, but sometimes a block could be for leaders as they reflect that, hey, perhaps we're not reaching out and forming other rich partnerships with organisations. We know partnerships are critical. You can do so much more. Now, the evening reflections, to make a few minutes, the 3 key questions to ask yourselves in the evening are these. So what issues need to be solved tomorrow? Write them down, get clear of them, and put them aside. That's one of the best things you can do. Create space in your mind. Gets it out of your mind so you don't wake up at 3 a.m. thinking about them. The second question, who do I need to help? Who do I need to talk to? Who do I need to enable? Who do I need to support in order to solve these problems tomorrow? And that can be, when you're answering questions like that, think about staff. Think about volunteers, think about board members, think about donors and other critical stakeholders, and think when you're asking that, who might I need to help, or who might I ask for help from? You know, both within your organisation and outside your organisation, really, really valuable points of reflection in environments like this. And then the third reflection point, and where I want to leave things at, to wrap up this piece, is this. You know, how do I manage me? How do I stay calm? Because it's easy to think that we have to get things right, and it's, you know, we have to be gentle with ourselves. We have to not bully ourselves as managers, as leaders, as just humans, human beings. You know, Geoff was talking about some great ideas, some great tools there. You know, evaluation criteria. You know, thinking about who else we could serve with our existing services, or perhaps we could expand the reach of our services. Now, that could put a lot of pressure on us in amongst this stressful environment we find ourselves in. So I want to encourage people to look after themselves and ask themselves, how do I manage myself? How do I be calm? How do I be gentle with myself? So I don't let the inner critic of my mind say, hey, I have to get this right today. No, you don't. There's always tomorrow and there's always the next day. And with the experimental mindset, you can be gentle with yourself and you can be gentle with those around you, because there's very real human challenges we're faced. And Geoff shared some great tangible templates and ideas and linked to some of the questions that people have asked. We will share those ideas that Geoff was sharing after this. And also remember to be gentle with yourself and not bully yourself to come up with the perfect, for example, evaluation criteria. But experiment with your evaluation criteria that Geoff was talking about. Iterate them one day. Look at them again the next day with fresh eyes after you've had a chance to reflect, and you'll find new ways to move forward. So they're the key things, Jody, that I think are really important from some of the human challenges. It's one, that ability to experiment and test and learn and encourage that in others, not just ourselves, but then the ability to reflect. And again, using not just free-formed reflection, but focused reflection with some targeted questions to help yourself, and share those reflection questions with other people as well. So I'm going to pause there, Jody, and back to you.
Thanks so much for that, Greg. I think it's that combination, right, of the rigor of strategy and strategic decision-making that Geoff's talking us through, with that more personal aspect of it, of how do you really make the time to reflect on the issues that even come out from that framework that Geoff shared with us. These are tough things that people are dealing with right now, and I really like your point about not bullying yourself. You know, when I'm talking to a lot of leaders in the sector at the moment, people are talking about that huge sense of responsibility that they carry for the community they serve, but also for the teams that they're leading. So just those few minutes a day to reflect can be incredibly powerful at just building your own personal resilience to get through this.
Absolutely. And people deserve that space and that time, Jody, to have that personal reflection opportunity.
I guess as a marketer as well, I mean, I'm always, whenever I'm in a situation, I'm looking for where are the opportunities here? Where are the opportunities for us to do things in different ways and to engage people with the stories of our change? And that's where the reflection can be really useful as well. The stories we tell ourselves about what we're going through, we often forget to share those stories with others. And I suppose that's where I add a little piece to this conversation around adapting business models, is these don't just have to be internal processes. So I think there's a huge opportunity for organisations who are going through so much change right now to really think about this and frame and deliberately construct this as part of a very compelling impact narrative that can engage diverse stakeholders. We're often so busy doing all of this change and managing this change that we forget about the importance of capturing and documenting the journey of transformation. That these evaluation frameworks that Geoff have given you don't have to remain internal. Last year, we conducted a needs assessment of the social purpose sector in Victoria, and I spent a lot of time with CEOs and leaders of a range of different social purpose organisations. And probably one of the big themes I heard was around this sense of isolation, that you can't really share what's going on within your organisation. And we're worried. We're worried about judgment from our peers. We're worried about destabilising our image in the eyes of government or donors or potential partners. But I think for the time we're in right now, if you're going through the process of adapting the way you're operating, so, you know, at the business school, we talk about it as your business model, but really we're talking about your operating model. And for those of you more comfortable with things like theory of change or logic models, we're really looking at how you unpack those and make some tough decisions. What we know from the way that people process information is that in the battle for hearts and minds, narrative will consistently outperform data every time. That storytelling and narrative influences people's thinking, it shapes attitude, and importantly right now, it is a key to motivating action. What we know from lots of scientific research is that the human brain has a lot of difficulty connecting with data, with numbers. And yet what I'm seeing is a lot of communication coming from social purpose organisations really about the numbers, how many people are in need, how much we've lost in revenue. And these numbers are important for us internally, but we do need to think about constructing a narrative around that data. That what we know is that stories and narratives are stored in memory as a complete organised mental structure. And that really facilitates recall. Whereas facts and figures, we store in our memory as discrete little pieces. And then we've got to go through the massive cognitive task of reassembling those facts for it to become a complete whole. And what we need to be doing right now is motivating action in our teams, in our volunteers, in our support base, in our government relations, and also with our peer organisations in terms of where we might potentially be able to partner for greater success. And it's emotion that produces the motivation necessary for action. So a lot of organisations I find right now, their story is anchored in this particular decrease in revenue, right? People are just definitely in crisis mode. There's a reduction in revenue. There's a reduction in the number of clients that you can meet and address their needs right now. But if you're going through this process of adapting your model, if you're using a rigorous framework for decision making, you've actually got a really compelling new story to tell. You've got the opportunity to consciously develop a transformation narrative. And that can be really powerful with a range of critical stakeholders. So in talking to a number of leaders lately, keeping staff motivated, everyone is struggling at the moment with different ways of working from home and not having that connection with each other. That motivating staff can be a really powerful thing by not just engaging them in this decision-making framework that Geoff's provided, but also getting them to reflect on their role in that story and getting them to tell the stories of change within the organisation, which then builds their commitment and momentum. It's also really important to be capturing these stories right now. This is going to be amazing collateral later on for engagement strategies, for marketing campaigns that really can show just how strong your organisation is. It's also a great way to engage your board. I'm really fortunate. I sit as a member of the Melbourne Recital Centre board, and we literally had to shut down at a moment's notice, and we've been planning for lots of times when we might start to reopen, but that's looking further and further away right now. And what I've learned from my experience with the amazing team, the senior leadership team at the Recital Centre, and particularly our CEO, Ewan, is how good they are at sharing the stories of change and urgency with the board. One example we had was obviously shutting down meant performances are closed. Artists and ensembles are not going to get paid. And the senior leadership team really told us a compelling story about what this was going to mean to the artists and asking the board to make a financial commitment to support these artists during the lockdown. Now, that was pretty compelling for us as a board, and it was a difficult decision when obviously we've had, massive cut in revenue to decide whether we would make a financial commitment at this time. But telling the story of these artists and what the payment's going to mean to them really motivated the board and motivated a lot of stakeholders to take action. And so what we then did was give audiences the opportunity to donate the cost of their refunded ticket, not to the Recital Centre as such, but to the Artist Support Fund that the Recital Centre created. Not only have we not had to dip into our own reserves to fund this, we've actually raised over $150,000 now. We've provided financial assistance to more than 60 local artists and ensembles. Now, getting paid for one missed performance is not going to make a huge difference for these artists in terms of their financial future right now. But what it does do is a really powerful message that you matter and you are valued, and we as an institution support you. Now, what we're doing is capturing those stories because that becomes part of our institutional narrative going forward. that becomes a proof point to supporters, to government, of our genuine responsiveness to the crisis right now. It gives confidence in the long-term viability of the institution and really sends a very clear signal about purpose and focusing on critical needs. Capturing these decisions, documenting them now, videoing things, recording Zoom meetings where these things are discussed, this can become part of your new story and really instill confidence in the eyes of stakeholders. It also gives you new stories to tell potential partners. I really think the crisis right now for social purpose organisations presents an amazing opportunity to start creating some shared narratives. Who could we be partnering with? If we don't have the financial capabilities right now, could we be partnering with peer organisations and therefore amplifying our shared impact? So this is where narrative, rather than just telling the story of numbers and data, can become a really powerful motivator for action. So I'm going to leave my remarks there so that we've got some time for Q&A. I can see that we've got quite a few questions here. So Geoff, I might actually start with you in terms of some of the questions. That this idea around thinking about building capability or how to increase financial capability through collaboration and other service providers. Is that something you could talk to about how the framework can help you decide whether partnership is the right opportunity to pursue right now?
Thank you, Jody. Yes, and I saw that in a couple of the questions actually. So we've got to work through our options with the partnerships. So there's been a couple of really good examples in this space. Asylum Seeker Resource Centre have worked very closely with a couple of big corporate sponsors to develop financial capability, but also to develop the capability internally to train asylum seekers and get them job ready. Now, in terms of the social problem that you're trying to solve and looking at the capability to address that social problem, it's a really good place to start in terms of looking at existing service providers to try and work out, am I reinventing the wheel? And could I potentially harness existing processes, knowledge, relationships, technology that's already out there? There's a really good example, a couple of Indigenous entrepreneurs that we work with in the MURA program, our Indigenous Leaders program, who wanted to make progress in the mental health space, addressing statistics around suicide in their community. And they started by asking the question, well, should we set up our own not-for-profit? But then they stopped and looked at the incredible organisations that already existed in that space. And so their model became, we're going to build financial capability and we're going to try and work out how we can bring our processes and our relationships, our advocacy capability to those existing organisations to build capability within them so that they can have a stronger impact. So in terms of partnerships, always stop and have a look around you at who is already in your space and who's already really good at the kind of things that you need to be good at. And maybe it's a case of, like, if that social problem is truly what gets me out of bed, maybe I need to be redirecting my resources to an organisation that is more able to solve that problem.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Geoff. I think some of the other questions that are coming up is around, if we do this work on evaluating our model, recognising that we might need to change the direction we're heading or change the sort of services we're offering, how do we convince the organisation, including the board, to do this quickly? So Geoff, I know you have quite a lot of interaction with senior leaders and boards around strategy and changing direction. Have you got any tips around how you can convince a board?
Well, it really does depend on the particular board and the people and their sensitivities. So it's very case by case, but a really good place to start is data. If you can put a lot of information in front of them to convince them, A, the extent of the social problem, and B, that you do have the capability to do something about that, given the resources and skills that you do have in your network. So you've got to build a persuasive case, as you do with any board, I suppose. And sometimes boards have a tendency to, depending on the individual, to be biased towards inertia or an existing solution. and you've just got to chip away. You've just got to keep presenting evidence to support your case. And I know that's easier said than done. I know there's a lot of challenges in this space, but I probably can't add a whole lot more there.
Yeah, I think that's where bringing the data to life for board members is so important. That how do we build this as a whole narrative for them, that they don't then just get focused on the little pieces of data or a few fact points, which you can then get bogged down in a board meeting, arguing different subjective interpretations of this data. Is how do we bring that board together? And I think it's telling the story behind that data, what it means for the organisation, where the potential is for the organisation. And I also often find when I'm helping leaders navigate complex discussions with boards, complex discussions with government or with donors, is that you've got to socialise this stuff before the board meeting. You need to be engaging with each board member individually to understand what are the big motivators for them. You need to understand where the motivation and the emotion in the decision-making resides in order to then pull the right levers to engage them with this decision. Because otherwise things can easily just get bumped to the next board meeting, right? We can't make a decision now. We want more data. That's always the fallback, right? We want more data. Actually, we don't want more data. We need more useful insights for this decision. And that's where the challenge is, turning data into insights to inform decisions. And that's where we need to tell more of the story around the data. Greg, have you got any tips around influencing people in that way?
Yeah, I do actually. And as you were talking, I always think one of the terms when in the innovation work that we do is we use a frame called jobs to be done. What's the job to be done, really? And sometimes there's a very functional job to be done. So that's someone needs to attend someone needs to participate in a mental health program, for example. So it's quite functional, really. But then there's other jobs to be done. What's the emotional job to be done? And what's the social job to be done? What does it mean emotionally for that person to feel included, to belong? You know, there's those higher order levels of need is what I hear you speaking to, Jody. So they apply to the people we're serving, but equally, as in the frame of this conversation, to board members as well. And often when I hear boards or those types of questions, you know, can we have more data? I pause and think, okay, they're not ready to make a decision. They don't perhaps feel like they've done thorough thinking. So I think, how can we help them think through their thoughts, but also think through and feel through their emotions and those other higher order needs, Jody? Because I think if people don't feel comfortable, if something feels skew, if not right, sometimes I think an escape is, I need more data, or can you get me X, Y, Z? And so then I see people busying themselves getting more data, getting more information, getting more numbers, where really if there'd been frequent communications, you know, perhaps offline, as you were suggesting, Jody, or outside meetings, to really uncover what are the motivations that really sit within this person. If we had that understanding and we were able to talk to them at that level, then that's when I see decisions happening quickly and rapidly. And we want to create environments going forward where decision making is quick, it is agile, it is iterative. And so it is about knowing who those critical people involved in those decisions are. Where do they sit emotionally as well and socially, not just in terms of intellect. So does that offer a perspective, Jody?
Yeah, I think that's great, Greg, because stakeholders, whether it's board, whether it's government, whether it's philanthropic supporters, that just presenting them more data doesn't actually often motivate action, even though people think government want data, and they do, right? We need rigor in our decision making. What they also need to know is our process that we've gone through for decision making. And that's where I think you can be building narrative into this, is really sharing the rigor that you've gone through. Often in marketing, there's no obvious right answer or wrong answer to a strategic decision. So all we can really rely on is the decision-making process we've used. Have we done a serious evaluation? Have we considered all of the options? And we often do that internally. It's just we then don't share with our stakeholders what that process was. And it's that can instill confidence and then motivate support or motivate decision-making when it comes to the board.
And probably what I'd add to that, Jody, is putting humans right at the core of that decision making, right at the core of that decision process that you're highlighting there. So, and what do I mean by humans? I mean it's the staff, it's the volunteers, it's the board members we're talking about, it's the donor and other stakeholders. So, you mentioned government there, Jody. Have we included government in our process of making decisions? Sometimes I feel like people have this belief that they have to present their work for assessment, and it'll get either a tick or a cross. And I like us to move away from that, and that's why I talk about experimenting. How might we experiment and involve people, all the aforementioned stakeholders, but involve people in the process of decision making, so it doesn't just sit on the shoulders and create pressure just for the leaders? How do you engage more stakeholders in the decision making process? How do you invite feedback? How do you invite ideas and celebrate ideas? Particularly invite ideas from those other organisations as well. Jody's been talking about the value of partnership, and partnerships are absolutely critical as we think about what's that ecosystem, that community of organisations that we're working in. Invite ideas, and just highlighting that you've done that in your decision-making process and what that's meant, that can do a whole lot for that narrative that you're talking about to convince boards and other funding providers for that purpose, Jody.
Thanks, Greg. Geoff, I'm going to give you a tricky question here, and I think it's one that probably a lot of organisations are grappling with, and I'm not sure there is any easy answer, is how do social enterprises, which are 100% fee for service, build financial capacity and partnership when they've lost all their income?
Yeah, and I was just looking at that one. So, and I was halfway through typing a response, so I'm pleased you posed it to me. So I'd suggest two things. The first thing is just go back to the list of all the potential services that you could get a fee for. So obviously you've lost 100% of the existing revenue streams. So ideate around what else is possible. So what else could I potentially sell given the resources, capabilities, skills, relationships that you have? So just try and lay all of those out and run it through that valuation criteria that we put in front of you before. The other one is we've seen quite a few social enterprises whose funding has dried up because of COVID pivot to a philanthropic model to try and get them through this period. And so that requires completing a funding proposal, which is a bit like a business case for a social enterprise. And I'll drop my email address here. If anyone wants a pro forma for a funding proposal for a social enterprise, I've got one. And it's just a case of explaining what the social problem is, what I'm doing about it, why I can solve that problem, and how much money I need. Just giving a range of options for funders to provide different fund different programs, or the whole lot. I saw a great example when I was in South Africa of a HIV services charity that did that when their revenue streams ran out. So in summary, explore new fee options and maybe look at philanthropic funding to get you through.
Yeah, I mean, tough ask at the moment going to any philanthropic organisation. I mean, they've had their investment incomes cut as well. So it's a difficult climate for everyone right now when we're talking about funding. And so that's where I think, in a way, there's two stories at play. There's how are we going to run right now and run lean for a while? And then how do we capture what we're still doing to position ourselves for a stronger future when funding and other things do start to recover? Greg, there's a question here about experimentation, that if you don't have the data necessary to know whether experimentation has worked, especially if you've only got a short testing time frame, what can you do around that? And it's an issue that comes up a lot for social purpose organisations, that the money goes into the activity, but not necessarily into tracking or evaluation or reporting. So what do you do if you can't easily get the data?
Yeah, thanks, Jody, and thanks, Jess, for posing that question. And Jody, you segued beautifully into what you can do. So you said the money often will go into the activity, perhaps not the evaluation of it. So recognise that, notice that's a pattern, and so perhaps there's an opportunity to expand the scope or the remit of where the money is being funded for. Okay, in an ideal world that happens. Probably in reality that's not going to be possible, particularly, Jody, as you said, in short time frame. So what can we do? I think it comes on to, I think we have a responsibility as professionals, doing this work, and for responsibility to serve the communities that we're serving more impactfully, to actually build in reviews, build in ways of capturing the data of what we're doing. And it feeds back into that board conversation. We do it not just to review where the money spent on that activity is going, but we do it to improve that activity going forward, so we can keep iterating it going forward. But we do it so we've got good data to share with critical stakeholders, whether boards or governments, those sorts of things. So we almost have to be diligent ourselves and build it in. Now, Jess, without an example, it's a little bit hard to know exactly how to help you. So I'll be more than happy to take this offline and have a more detailed conversation around examples following this. But having said that, so then what data do you capture, just speaking generally? Sometimes we don't know. So again, if we're taking an experimental approach and iterative test and learn, put some measures in place, just 1 or 2 measures. This will be successful if there's less patient relapses, type of thing. This will be successful if there's less people drawing on our services. Or this will be successful if there's more people, more people enrolling or more people signing up for this way of working remotely as we think about supporting the youth in our area. So just put 1 or 2 measures in place, Jess. Simple ones that top of mind. Again, don't bully yourself to get it right. Again, just back to that message. Put them in place, try it and see how it goes, with the view of you'll iterate it perhaps the next day or next week. But just put 1 or 2 in place. That would be my advice.
Yeah, I think that's where you can also rely on some of the qualitative insights that social purpose organisations are so good at collecting. We often think of them in terms of testimonials, but these are data points. You might only have a few clients where you've tested this new approach with, but capturing their lived experience, just documenting a brief interview with them, getting to share their experience, even if you don't have a big random sample and lots of quantitative data. It is often, we know, the story of one that motivates action and that captures the attention of government and donors and other supporters and motivates volunteers and staff. We're often not motivated actually by the story of hundreds or thousands. We get motivated by that kind of narrative transportation into the life of someone else. So even just being able to tell the story of one person who has experienced this new model that you're trialing, that can sometimes be enough to kind of be the basis for further seed funding or more partnership or more support. So I'm really conscious of the time and that we stay committed to just keeping you for an hour. And I'm sure that we could continue this conversation for much longer, and we actually will. I mean, this is the first in a series of webinars that we're running specifically for the social purpose sector. And it's an area where the school is really committed. We have talked a long time at the business school around business being for a better future for everyone. And that's where we see building the business capability of social purpose organisations and leaders and volunteers in the sector as a really important way to build a thriving sector that's going to support a more civil and just society. And so I'd like to thank Geoff and Greg for joining me, and you'll see us all again in September. We have a number of upcoming webinars on a range of topics. Actually, 2 of the next ones are specifically around data issues. So for social purpose leaders who are grappling with that, there can be some great lessons from for-profit organisations. And then the next seminar specifically for the social purpose sector is on the 18th of September. And that's where we're focusing on how to build digital and technological capability. So Greg will be leading a big part of that conversation around how you create the right mindset and culture to support digital and technology capability. And we've got the fantastic Jessie Macpherson, CEO of St Kilda Mums, who's going to share some of their experiences as one of the early adopters of digital capability in driving their organisation's success. So thanks so much for joining us today. I invite you to join us at our upcoming webinars. You'll get a recording from this webinar. Geoff and Greg and I will also put some summary notes together for you, but also feel free to get in touch with any of us if we can be of help. So thanks so much and stay safe, everyone.